Well, Baku 24 in Azerbaijan. Um, really good race. One of the more exciting ones for the year. I thought it worth classifying it as a rum race. Um, where to start? I'm gonna, in keeping with the format lately, I'm gonna keep it a little shorter than the typical, in the 20-minute range, and not go into too much detail about the back markers unless something particularly noteworthy occurred. So let's start with the big thing. Piastri, win, congratulations. And I would say, I don't know, brilliant might be an overused word, but his drive was brilliant. Not so much for the win alone, but the pressure that he had to withstand and the consistency in which he had to drive in terms of where he had to brake, where he had to position his car every single lap after lap. I mean, it's basically 35 laps of 100% pressure from Leclerc. I mean, because we're gonna get to him shortly, because his was also quite impressive, his drive. But the fact is, Piastri withstood withstood that pressure in a way that is, remarkable. I mean, we need to put something in perspective here. Now, Piastri is still a very young, inexperienced driver. This is only his second year in F1. I mean, that's impressive. Let's give credit where credit is due. I mean, the McLaren is fast. Right now he definitely isn't the fastest car, because there is no question that the McLaren is the fastest car on the grid. But the reality is, if you can't turn that speed into a result, then the speed is wasted. And trust me, he was fast. He was consistent. And just like that pass he made on Norris at the last race in Monza, that pass he made on Leclerc was great. I mean, he was coming from far back. If you look back, I don't, that might have been before I started doing the videos, Vegas last year, I think. But I used to do these long write-ups on Facebook, and I remember distinctly talking about this brilliant pass that Leclerc did on Perez in Vegas, coming from so far back, having the car under control and a braking, managing to make the turn, not understeering wide, getting on the power back early enough so that he wasn't immediately repassed. And I thought that was one of the best passes of the year that I had seen. And so far, that pass by Piastri on Leclerc was very reminiscent of that. Coming from far back, high speed, getting the brake balance just right so that you just manage to turn the car in, and crucially, not just turning, but able to get back on the power enough that you're not immediately repassed. I was deeply impressed. Superb drive. And something I've mentioned before is his mental composure. Again, for a young driver and a relatively inexperienced one, his mental composure is remarkable. He has this killer mindset, but not emotional. You know what I mean? It's like he's just cold and ruthless and just relentless. I'm very impressed with him, and I'm looking for big things. I had mentioned it a couple of races back that Norris should be worried. I mean, even though Norris is kind of the star, for want of a better term, for McLaren right now, I think Norris should be worried. Piastri is the real deal. Let's do this fast. Not that he's necessarily going to be faster over a single lap than Norris, because I don't think he ultimately will be. But as a consistent race winning contender and championship contender, He is strong in a lot of the areas that Norris is weak. And I tell you, he's gonna be a guy to watch. He's the real lead. And I'm not, being swayed by recency bias at all. Because of how well he did in this race. I've spoken of it in previous races as well. That he's really good. While we're on McLaren, let's give Norris credit as well. Because even though he dropped the ball badly in qualifying, yes, yellow flag, but I think he also just didn't put the lap together as well as he probably could have. The fact is he recovered superbly. I mean, fourth is still a fantastic result. Remember, he qualified 17th because of the madness. He ended up being 15th. But that's still a great result. It's 11 places gained. That's no mean feat. Yes, you have the fastest car, but still you have to put it together. So let's give him credit where credit is due. And let's also recognize that McLaren made a great strategy call and Norris was in the right position and did the right thing when he held up Perez, because the fact is that was crucial. I know for sure that maybe second and a half to 2 seconds that Perez lost by being backed up by Norris in the middle section there definitely gave Piastri the window that he needed to come out ahead in the pit stop. And that was crucial for the race. Not that Piastri wouldn't necessarily have gotten ahead, but the truth is Perez was right there for the whole race. Even though it kind of ebbed and flowed slightly, Perez was right there. So it's not like there's a sure guarantee that that Piastri could have just passed Perez. Yes, he managed to pass Leclerc, but it was difficult to do and took a lot out of him. And Perez is a brilliant defensive driver. I mean, he didn't get the nickname the Minister of Defense for nothing. So that action by Norris to back him up a little bit, back up Perez a little bit to allow Piastri that pit stop, was a critical juncture in the race, and McLaren made the right call, and kudos to them. Let's quickly debate in between Ferrari and Red Bull next. Let's look at Ferrari. Leclerc also drove a great race. Yes, in the end he lost out, but I thought he drove a superb race. In fact, if you look at his pace on the mediums, one would have been tempted to give him the race, from the early stages. I think he was very, very unpleasantly surprised at how badly the car behaved on the hards. As he rightly pointed out after his accident in free practice, he didn't really get enough run time, I think, especially on long runs in practice, to set up the car on the hards, and you can see it hurt him badly, because once the car went to the hards, he was struggling. I mean, it was obvious that he didn't have the pace. Yet, having said that, he recovered masterfully, even though the car didn't have the pace. He still managed to pressure Piastri non-stop. I mean, that kind of relentless pressure, again, is hard without making a mistake. It's easy to misjudge a braking point, easy to get it wrong on corner exit. I mean, speaking of corner exit, I have to comment on that spectacular moment when Piastri was leading and he came out of the corner and got on the curb and the car was oversteering, and Leclerc came around behind him and started to oversteer as well. I mean, that was just magic. That just, if you want to know why I love Formula One, that's why I love Formula One. Moments like that, to just see two really good guys in two reasonably well-matched cars just going at it hammer and tongue, lap after lap after lap. No let up. That was magic. I mean, that really, I mean, I was just reveling in that race. Perez also was there. I mean, boy, what a turnaround for him. There's a lot that can be said about the whole Red Bull thing with Verstappen and Perez, and because I'm trying to keep the video short, and kind of just focus on the race itself, I'm going to limit that. Maybe I keep saying sometimes when I do these videos that I'll do another video on another subject not related to a specific race. And I think this time I might have to, because I think the championship is at a point now where it requires a little topic on its own about where I see the championship developing and so on. And potentially for next year as well with the cars and so on. So we'll probably have to get to that. But suffice to say, Perez drove a superb race. Both for him and Sainz and, McLaren and Red Bull, as I said earlier. Very disappointing end. I'll touch on that in a second as well. But for the race itself, great drive by Perez. Strong drive by Sainz as well. Let's give credit where credit is due again. Sainz is very fast in the end. Let's not forget, Sainz was catching the entire field, right? Sainz was actually faster than the 3 cars ahead of him, because he made up that gap very strongly. Yes, Leclerc and Piastri were fighting, but the truth of the matter is I don't think either of them could have gotten much more pace out of their cars in free if they weren't fighting, because I think both of them by that time, their tires were pretty much, that was it for them. They weren't going to get much more out of the tires at that point. And because if they could have, they would have. Piastri would have tried to pull away from Leclerc if he could have gone faster. Leclerc would have attacked and passed Piastri if he could have gone faster. So I think both of them were fairly well at their limits. And I think similarly with Perez, if he had more in the car, he probably could have attacked Leclerc. And he couldn't. So the fact is, Sainz was catching him at the end, which means he had the pace. So it's a great drive by him. Proper tire strategy, well-judged pace, and he could have, launched an attack towards the end. As it turned out, that was a disastrous accident. I'll give my personal opinion on it. It wasn't an outright screw up, but if I'm gonna lay blame, I probably would say it was Sainz. I watched it over and over, especially very critically the overhead views from the helicopter. And you can clearly see Sainz gradually drifting to the left, while Perez was absolutely dead straight. Perez's car did not deviate from his line even a millimeter, whereas Sainz definitely drifted across into Perez. Now, having said that, Perez was a little bit behind, not substantially, because the front of his car was essentially alongside the middle of Sainz's car. So he certainly had a right to be pushing there. But I'm not necessarily obligated to give up a space. However, here's a proviso why I'm saying that. Although I'm blaming Sainz ultimately for the accident, Perez has to suck up some of the blame as well. The fact is, from his vantage point being slightly behind, he can see that Sainz is drifting over. It's not like Sainz made a sudden twitch. It's a gradual drift. And as such, Perez had more than enough opportunity to slightly adjust his line as well and avoid the accident. It's all well and good to say, yes, Sainz is coming over, but it's not as if Perez was against the left side of the track. He had, 2 car widths probably on his left. So he could have easily just drifted gradually, just as Sainz was so gradually drifting. But guess what? Both Sainz and Perez, are trying to get into Leclerc's slipstream because they realize that this is a moment of weakness. Both of them have the chance to attack, as both of them did try to, and Sainz actually almost got up on Leclerc. So the reality is, both of them are so focused on trying to stay exactly tucked in behind Leclerc to get as much draft as they can, that they're not even paying attention to each other and end up crashing. Very disappointing, and probably pretty lucky too, because it was a decent enough impact and a decent enough speed, and when 2 cars get tangled up like that together, a lot of things can happen. So they're probably pretty lucky there. Big accident, and I think a couple lessons can be learned from that one, but we'll see how that works out. I'm glad to see that the stewards didn't go overboard with that. I mean, they blame both of them, which I think, as I said, is fair, even though I do think Sainz is a little more to blame. But I don't think it warranted a punishment. At first, I was kind of annoyed. When I watched it back the first couple of times, I was like, boy, Sainz really screwed up. But then, when I really gave it some thought, I said, no, I think Perez could have avoided it as well. So, I think that ended up working out the way it should have. Couple other standouts for me. I thought that Colapinto drove very well. Albon drove well. Alonso came up. The midfield was very competitive. The Haas weren't bad. Hulkenberg and Boy Beerman, I mean, scoring points again. That's an interesting stat that has been bandied about this weekend, that Beerman is the first driver in history to earn points on his debut with two separate teams consecutively. That's an interesting stat. And in the modern era, considering how difficult points are to come by, when you look at how many drivers over the last few years have been in it and haven't even scored a single point, that's pretty impressive. Beerman is a solid driver. He doesn't get the hype quite to the extent of, say, Antonelli or so, but he's a solid driver, and I think he's going to do. I think he has a good future. He has a level head, and he has a good future. Pretty good. Color Pinto also, man, I mean, I'm deeply impressed. This guy is certainly, signaling notice for any other team that might be interested in him next year, because let's not forget, this drive is temporary. Sainz is going to take his spot next year. But I was quite impressed with Color Pinto. For somebody who I'm aware of peripheral, in F2 and so on, but not necessarily paid attention to him. I think he was lying 6th in the F2 championship, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong with that, but yeah, so obviously he's competent, but proven to be pretty good. 2 solid races now so far. And let's not forget, Albon, who he's against, is no slouch. Albon is really good. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Albon, and I constantly tout, his abilities. So for this guy to come and be doing what he's doing now is deeply impressive to me, right? So I tell you, he's a guy to watch. I think it will be interesting to see next year if he's picked up by a couple of teams. Also, same thing. Well, Beerman has his Haas stripes. I mean, he's basically, I think, confirming what, whatever decision was taken there, that it was the right one. As I said, I'm going to try and keep this under 20 minutes. So what I will say is the championship, a little talk on it as I do in each race now going forward, that I've been doing in the last few as well. Norris has made up 3 points. That's not enough. If there isn't a dramatic change, Verstappen is going to win the championship again. The fact is, Norris needs to, it's gotten worse, in fact, for Norris now, because every race that passes, the amount of points that he has to win for each race in terms of advantage over Verstappen is increasing. Previously it was 7. Now I think it's 9. Because as the races tick down and he's not winning by big margins in terms of points, as in he's not finishing first or second, and Verstappen isn't finishing like 6th and 10th and so on, it's getting statistically harder and harder for Norris to win the championship. It's still mathematically possible, of course, and in fact, a couple of mechanical, like DNFs or so on for Verstappen, or a couple of really bad races, like let's look at Singapore coming up next, which last year was a disaster for Red Bull. If Verstappen finishes, for example, out of the points at Singapore and Norris finishes high up, it can bring the averages back in his favor. But one of the things working against Norris is, well, he has a number of things working against him. One, so far, even though he's been chipping away at the lead, Verstappen has not been screwing up. So every time something happens where Verstappen doesn't necessarily do well, he doesn't do terribly either. So he's still managing to accumulate his points as he's going along. Right? He's not losing disastrously. That's number one. Number two, every time that Verstappen does poorly and doesn't earn a lot of points, Norris isn't either. In other words, when Norris should be pressing home his advantage, as in when Verstappen is in the 6th to 10th region in finishing, Norris isn't finishing first or second. That's the problem. Norris is finishing down as well. And that, so in other words, every time he has the chance to increase his advantage, he doesn't. So that's hurting him quite a bit. Third and final thing is, Even if Verstappen doesn't finish well, it's not a foregone conclusion that Norris is going to finish well either. Why? Other than his aforementioned issues that he's having, he has a lot of competition. The fact of the matter is, on any given weekend, Leclerc, Piastri, Russell, Hamilton, whoever can easily also usurp him. And so it's not like he has this, it's not like he only has Verstappen to worry about in terms of gaining points. So it's, to me, it's a tall order. It's doable, but it's a tall order. As to the constructors now, oh lordy, McLaren is just floating away. Again, not that it can't change, because Ferrari is looking pretty decent, but I don't see Ferrari realistically getting it together to the point where they're going to challenge McLaren. The only realistic challenge to McLaren is if Red Bull sorts themselves out towards the end of the season and can start to earn back some points. Now, what happened here in Baku with Perez is very encouraging for Red Bull, because one of Red Bull's biggest challenges is not just the fact that Verstappen hasn't been winning, but that Perez hasn't been contributing to the points totals. If this isn't a fluke, because let's not forget, Baku is probably one of Perez's favorite tracks. It's like a specialist track for him. He's won here twice already, and he's also done very well in the other races that he didn't win. The fact is, this could be a fluke, right? However, if it isn't, and the setup of the car is now more in keeping with Perez liking, meaning there's a little more understeer dialed into the chassis, which is something Verstappen hates, but Perez likes. If that is so, and Perez can start to genuinely contribute back to the points chase, then McLaren may not have it all its own way. There's a lot up for grabs. And it kind of leads me to conclude with a teaser to say, all of those, typical Hamilton sycophants and British fans and British media and so on who, oh, it's boring and rare. You certainly can't say that now. This championship is wide open. It's brilliant. Yeah, you hated it when Verstappen was winning. Well, guess what? He's not winning anymore. But your guy isn't winning either, unfortunately for you. However, it's such a wide open championship now, it's not funny. Because even with the drivers, what a shock if Piastri really hits his stride. Suppose Piastri can overtake Norris. Suppose even Leclerc, suppose Ferrari really starts getting it. Let me kind of just play devil's advocate here. What if not Perez? What if Leclerc and Piastri really hit their stride and start consistently finishing in the top three? Norris is not really gonna have it all his own way. I think this season is really turning out to be a nice one. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And I really look forward to the races as they go along, because I think we have a lot of interesting developments ahead. On to Singapore, difficult race, and one which, if you look at last year, how unpredictable it was, look at how badly Red Bull did, look at what happened to Russell. I mean, a lot of things can look at the brilliance of Sainz. I don't know if you remember that strategy with the DRS, which, kind of opened up everybody's eyes to this new way of doing things. A lot of things can happen in Singapore. I'm looking forward to it. Onward with it.